When I look at World War I and World War II, this is how those got started. Am I calling for World War now? No, but we'll have to see how this goes. Now is the time to prep. And I'm not just talking gold and silver. I'm talking about you want to make sure you have food security. You want to make sure you have physical security. Essentially, what you learn in cybersecurity is the banking system is the most attacked sector. People should not take for granted your banking accounts. They should not take for granted anything that relies on the grid or the internet. They should not rely on their own personal computer security. If somebody really wants to compromise you, they can. And I think physical precious metals is a good way to protect your finances, even some physical cash, even dollar bills, during a time at which we could have some bank closures due to cybersecurity.
Here at Liberty in Finance, we're licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. We are standing by the inventory, ready to make sure you get what you need, even into the wee hours of night and on weekends, because preparedness doesn't stop. Call us 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty in Finance. And back with us today is our good friend Robert Kientz from Gold Silver Pros. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Elijah.
It's great to have you. There's not a lot going on in the world right now. Your perspective on what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. Russia invaded. We've seen the stock market and the precious metal markets just going crazy. Your perspective.
Yeah, I think in the last few weeks, the stock market has started to correct. I think the indices were approaching a 10% correction. I think this morning there was a 600-point correction in the stock market here in the U.S. They're open wedges down, which is not a good technical formation. It means there's a lot of downside pressure on the markets. And I guess I can see the sell-off in light of what's going on in Ukraine, although honestly, the true effects haven't hit the U.S. economy just yet. But what we're seeing in the news, and I was just listening to President Biden address the nation on ABC News, he was saying that it is confirmed. We've seen it across several news outlets this morning, as early as 4:30 this morning when I was looking. Russia has invaded Ukraine on the maps that the media is reporting. They're headed toward the capital, Kiev. They're headed toward the southern port of Mariupol. It's not just eastern Ukraine. The president of Ukraine has come out and said that they're making some progress in Donbass, but hasn't addressed the other areas. But it is a multi-front, full-scale invasion. Russian troops, Russian helicopters flying over Kiev. So it's a full-scale thing. The president just announced that they're going to continue sanctions against not only Russia, against limiting their use of Western systems and Western trade. They're also going after some of the elites or the well-to-do in Russia and limiting their bank accounts as well. President Biden said that they had seized $250 billion from one major bank that was Russia's. Russia, on its side, has announced that they're doing trade in euros, and China is supporting them by reassuring them that they will not do anything on the Chinese-Russian border. So Russia's able to move troops from that Chinese border over to the West. So China is helping, I guess, in some ways, reassure Russia. And I think this is going to continue the development of de-dollarization for China and Russia. And I think Russia and China have developed their own SWIFT-like system. So I don't think that a lot of these sanctions are necessarily going to hurt Russia as much as it actually might hurt the U.S. and the West, because Russia has about 32% of world gas production. They have a lot of production of aluminum, copper, and tin, and those futures have already started to spike in the futures markets in anticipation of supply shortages. Russia is the second largest producer of platinum and palladium in the world, behind South Africa. So I actually think this could affect U.S. markets a little bit more than Russian ones, but we'll have to see what happens.
And your perspective on the short-term volatility that we've seen in the precious metals, overnight they just skyrocketed. Gold up to 1970, and now they've pulled back quite a bit. What is causing all of this volatility, you think?
So I think the volatility is in after-hours trading. The rest of the world market is trading up on gold and silver. You saw it about 8:30 a.m. Eastern time this morning, gold and silver get slammed down in the U.S. market. So there is a bifurcation or a difference between the opinion of the worth of gold and silver in the United States and in the rest of the world, probably indicative of what's going on in the rest of the world versus the United States. I don't think U.S. speculators are quite as alarmed immediately and aren't trading up gold and silver as much, which is why you see the short action. But I think that's relatively short term. The good news is gold and silver are both up. Gold has broken an 18-month consolidation pattern. Silver's above 2450, which is a key resistance line, and above its 200-day moving average, which is a key resistance line. So I think the metals are going to run a little bit here. And what's not being talked about because of Russia-Ukraine nearly as much as inflation, Elijah, inflation is running really high. The producer price index right now is 9.7%. That was announced within the last week. That's the second month in a row it's been over 9%. I think the previous month was 9.8. So we're seeing about double-digit inflation in the producer prices. How long is it that the producers can hold out on passing that to consumers? And how long is it before we have double-digit inflation in the CPI? I think it's quite possible the CPI is massively understated. We've talked about alternative measurements like John Williams at Shadow Stats has it at 14 to 15%. So I think there's a lot of economic news and economic reasons why gold and silver should be trading higher. But I almost think the Ukraine situation is sort of covering that over.
You're saying that this could be double-digit inflation this year for the CPI?
I don't think there's any way to avoid it unless the government fiddles with the numbers, because when you have producer prices running at about double digits, and that's conservative. The PPI is I think, in my opinion, an understated number, because when I go look at prices at the grocery store, I think we already have double-digit real-life inflation. So for the CPI not to reflect what people are seeing in the grocery stores, for it not to reflect what the producers are already been seeing. And, if you look at China, a couple of months ago, they had a 13.5 PPI print. So their producer prices are much higher. There's inflation across the world, Elijah. It's not just in the United States. So if we don't see double-digit CPI this year, I'd be absolutely shocked. But it would probably mean that the government really doesn't want there to be a print. So they're going to figure out a new way to adjust that number down.
The crazy thing, though, is as we're seeing this raging inflation, the stock market is taking a dip. And we're even seeing that more today as the Russia-Ukraine situation is playing out. But your perspective on that, if we continue to see increasing inflation, will the stock market go back up, or will it just continue to crash?
I think the stock market is reacting to the risk environment. It does pay attention to the risk environment, but honestly, I think there have been pressures on the stock market here for a while. It was actually falling before the war in Ukraine started, and I think that has a lot to do with economic fundamentals. And if you look at the price to earnings ratio of the stock market, it's at all-time highs. It was second only to the tech market, and now it's getting in tech market crash territory in 1999, 2000. So the price to earnings multiples are higher than they were during right before the Great Depression crash, right before the Lehman incident in 2008, 2009. So the stock market's been overvalued. I've been waiting for a sell-off to occur. We've had a 10% correction in the broad market already. We'll see where it goes. I don't see any reason, though, with a relatively lackluster earnings season that we just had, for the stock market to continue to trade up. I know it's buoyed by passive investing. I know that the market just looks at the fact that these companies have positive earnings and continues to bid them up. But at some point, that has to stop. It always has in history. I don't know if this is the big stock market crash, to be honest with you. But, this correction was way overdue. We've had the longest running bull stock market in American history. At some point, it had to pull back. Do we blame that all on Ukraine? I don't think we quite can. I think you've got to look at rising bond rates. You've got to look at the Fed saying they're going to raise rates and cut off the easy money, all of the quantitative easing that they've done. However, whether they can do that now due to the Ukraine situation, we don't know. I almost think the Fed may back off a little bit from raising rates and cutting its asset purchases of the treasuries. We'll have to see what happens. I think a lot of things right now, Elijah, are up in the air in terms of how the Fed is going to react to not only what's going on with inflation, but what's going on to the geopolitical situation over in Eastern Europe.
Now, the U.S. has promised to only impose economic sanctions and not go to war in Ukraine with Russia. Do you think they'll hold to that? And will that give any consolation to the markets at all?
I think it could, because Ukraine's not one of these NATO nations. There was a lot of jawboning in recent months whether Ukraine should be made a NATO nation. And I think it might have actually pushed Russia more towards invading now versus later, because even though Putin has said he believes that those areas of Ukraine are still part of the Soviet bloc, if you will, that old USSR Soviet bloc, and he believes that they owe allegiance to Russia. I think the fact that the old agreement for where NATO should end in Eastern Europe and where it is now, it's migrated east towards Russia over time, has really sort of forced Russia's hand, if you will. So I think a lot can be said for what the NATO allies have done in terms of expanding that border. I don't think that the U.S. goes to war with Russia right now because Ukraine's not one of those. But if they attack Poland, or if they go after one of these other former Eastern USSR bloc states in Eastern Europe, that would be a different story. Right now, the president just announced that they're moving troops into parts of Eastern Europe, not on the border with Ukraine, but in Eastern Europe to support Latvia and Estonia and all these other NATO members. It sure looks to me, Elijah, like we're doing a military buildup there. We know F-35s are going there, Black Hawk helicopters, thousands of troops from Germany and other locations in Europe. That looks to me like, a buildup. So the key thing there to watch for is, does Russia continue going west? Do they attack one of these NATO states? I think it'd be silly right now to do it. And I think things, after they've claimed what they want to claim in Ukraine, it'll probably settle down for a while. Markets will probably settle down for a bit. But, when I look at World War I and World War II, this is how those got started. Am I calling for World War now? No, but we'll have to see how this goes. It just depends. Is China going after Taiwan? Is Russia going after more than just Ukraine? If these guys keep expanding their borders, then we get closer to a situation where we have to say, maybe this is more serious and more real.
Now, the former name of this channel was Reluctant Preppers. And I think right now it's more important to be a prepper than pretty much any time we've seen recently. Your perspective on this, how people can prep maybe for a worst case scenario, and some of the things people should be looking out for to see that this might be heating up even further.
Yeah, I've been a big fan of this channel since it was named Reluctant Preppers, and all the work that Dunnigan's done here and all of his guests. Having a dad that was in World War II and a mom that grew up during the Great Depression, I'm acutely aware of when things, don't run as well as they've run in the U.S. in the last 50 years. And we've basically had the best lifestyle of any, civilization in history on the planet. Many things don't always go that way. And they go in 80-year cycles where you have, conflicts and things aren't as easy. And I do think from a preparation standpoint, it goes beyond gold and silver and finances. I think it goes towards, food security. It goes towards physical security. Things like that. And on my channel this morning, I did a very, what I would say, expressive live for about 15 minutes, where I just basically said, now's the time to prep. And I'm not just talking gold and silver. I'm talking about, you want to make sure you have food security. You want to make sure you have physical security. You want to make sure that you have a good network if you need to get goods. Think back to the pandemic. Elijah, was hard to get toilet paper, or it was hard to get gas in some places. Do you have a way to get the things that you need? And building networks of people that can help you get the things that you need is a good idea. Look at your prescriptions, make sure you have your diabetic medication or whatever medication you need. Because think about it, if we get into even just trade wars with these other nations, how much is produced by China, which is an ally of Russia? I think 92% of our prescription drugs actually come from China. What happens if China starts to throw sanctions on the U.S. as an ally of Russia? What happens if it's harder to get things out of Europe because of their energy crisis? Our supply chain is extremely fragile, and any sort of geopolitical conflict can kick off some of these fragilities to where we may not be able to get what we've always taken for granted in our just-in-time inventory system that we have around the world today. So being prepared and going beyond financial preparedness is always a good idea, and take the lessons from, my parents in the past when, they had to make and grow everything that they had. I don't know if we're going to go back to a time like that, but certainly I could see a situation where it's much harder to get a hold of things that you need that we take it for granted today, in the future because of these types of conflicts.
When it comes to investing in precious metals, a lot of people are, we've noticed this at Miles Franklin, they're purchasing junk silver. And this is something that a lot of people have been thinking of. Well, it could be used for barter in the future if money, a currency that we use, the US dollar, isn't worth anything in the future. Your perspective on that, and is it good to hold some, of the most recognizable kinds of precious metals and most visible kinds of precious metals to possibly weather a pretty bad storm ahead.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think the constitutional money, the pre-65 silver coins in the U.S. are recognized because they're minted. They were official government currency. People recognize them. I think there's a lot of trust in them. And it's easy to educate people on the ones that have silver versus the ones that don't. It's a simple thing to do. And some of the first silver that I purchased was the junk silver or the constitutional silver, just because it was low premium at the time. I think the premiums have gone up a little bit. I also purchased American Eagles because it's a minted government coin in the U.S. It's very recognized, or the Canadian maple leaf, for example. Or you could go gram gold. If you want to get small denominations you may barter with, there are gram gold bars that you can buy. Premiums a little bit higher on those, but they're smaller denominations of gold, which you could probably trade and barter. And I honestly think if we end up having severe economic trouble and severe dollar trouble because of all the de-dollarization around the world, I do think you will be able to use precious metals in every day. Because if I were to hand you precious metals, and I've just got a little cup of silver shot here, this silver shot may be worth several $100s in the future. And that may pay for daycare for my kid, or that may pay for my prescription. And if you're a store, and don't think this can't happen, if you're a grocery store and the dollar is hyperinflating and you got to figure out what to take to run your store, and somebody comes up with silver and gold and it has intrinsic value, I think we will return to a time in which people will accept that. And I think it's going to shock a lot of people. They're going to take it before they take paper dollars at some point. And it's just a good reminder now of what's going on in the world, that, hey, sometimes the world goes through tough spots and trouble spots, and you can't always count on existing systems, especially paper systems. And to have a little bit of physical protection is a good idea, and to do it in ways that people will recognize in the most commonly issued, formats and coins is a good idea.
Now, I know a couple weeks ago, the Department of Homeland Security had warned about a cyber attack, and I guess my question to you is, how do you think, if that does happen, if the U.S. does impose, with the sanctions they're imposing on Russia and all that, if Russia counterattacks the U.S., do you think that could impact bank accounts, and how should people be prepared for that?
Yes. So, Elijah, as you may know, my master's degree is in information assurance, which is basically cybersecurity from Norwich University, which at the time I completed in 2014 was the second ranked cybersecurity program in the U.S. It was a Department of Homeland Security certified program. And because it was a military academy, I did go to school with Department of Homeland Security, CIA, Army, Navy. And so we learned about a lot of things. And I worked in cybersecurity for about 8 to 10 years. And essentially what you learn in cybersecurity is the banking system is the most attacked sector if you're going to go like a vertical perspective. Educational institutions, of course, because they have knowledge, and knowledge basically is wealth in today's times. But the banks are the most attacked, and they're the most hardened, but they're not foolproof. The thing you learn about cybersecurity, somebody really wants to get in, they can get in. It's all then about limiting that damage. People should not take for granted your banking accounts. They should not take for granted anything that relies on the grid or the internet. They should not rely on their own personal computer security. If somebody really wants to compromise you, they can. And I think physical precious metals is a good way to protect your finances, even some physical cash, even dollar bills, during a time at which we could have some bank closures due to cybersecurity. I will also say this. I was in Virginia last year for business when the pipeline got shut down between Texas and the East Coast. That was a cybersecurity attack. It was a ransomware attack on the pipeline that moves oil up there. We ran the whole East Coast almost all the way up to New Jersey, ran out of gas. We could not get around. We could not get to the grocery store. It was a scary situation. And that was a singular attack on a single pipeline in the U.S. that literally brought, commerce almost to a stop over several eastern, very populous states. And so cyber attacks, when concentrated, if you get into a real war, pronounced war, could do a lot of things. It could turn off electricity. It could affect banks. Okay. It could shut down supplies of oil and natural gas. It could do a lot of things. So having assets outside the system and being prepared outside the system, I think, is always a good idea. Take it from somebody who worked in cybersecurity for a very long time. That is a very real and existential threat that I don't think many people are as aware of. And it's good that it's getting pressed now. It's good that people are finally talking about it.
All right. Well, a lot of things happening, Robert. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your insights. I know, you're Christian as well. I see the cross in the background there. And I think at the end of the day, finances are important, all that. At the end of the day, it's most important to have, your spiritual life in order in these times. But Robert, thank you so much for your time. God bless. And where can our viewers find you online if they're looking to hear more?
Well, they can go to goldsilverpros.com. They can go to Gold Silver Pros on Twitter and YouTube, and they'll find us right there. And thank you, Elijah, for having me back on.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we will let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be double boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Elijah, my brother Kaiser, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.